Hello, everyone. This is Robert Grant. I'm very excited to host this new program to you, and it is called the Data Sovereignty Show. This is a really important discussion that we're going to be having today with a couple of guests that I think are just amazing individuals. And one of them is Neil Sahota. Neil is an IBM Master Inventor. He has worked with the United Nations in artificial intelligence subject matter as an expert. He's also a professor at UC Irvine. We're thrilled to have Neil here. He's been on our advisory board for, I guess it's been almost 3 years now. And he's become a great friend also. He has more than 20 years of business experience, and Neil works to inspire clients and business partners to foster innovation and develop next generation products and solutions powered by AI. So he's got a lot of experience spanning several different sectors of industry, including healthcare, life sciences, retail, travel, transportation, energy, utilities. Gosh, you've done so much. And he's all around just a good human being. So we're happy to have Neil with us today. And my second special guest is Jahon Jamali. And Jahon is with Sarson Funds. He's the chief marketing officer and co-founder. He's in cryptocurrency and blockchain and technology and digital asset educator. And he talks often about Bitcoin, fintech, blockchain, digital assets, and cryptocurrency. He formerly worked in the intelligence community for the United States government. And both of you guys are I'm thrilled to have both of you here today to have this conversation with the three of us, because I think there is not probably a more important discussion to be had as relates to where things are in the world right now. And it's pretty shocking, actually, as you look at it. And I want to first off just sort of like let you kind of vent a little bit and tell us how you feel about the current circumstance related to what's happening with social media and AI, and how do we get this right back on track? I'll let Neil go first. Go ahead, Neil.
All right. Well, I'm excited to be here, so thanks for having me on, Robert.
Sure thing.
You know, they say data is the new oil, and unfortunately that's a sword that cuts both ways. So we've got this essentially war to get as much data as possible and centralize it and utilize it. And that's why, you think about like, a lot of social media companies, they're really data companies as a result. Is it fair that we don't get to leverage our own data? Are the services we get from social media enough? Are social media a little too invasive? I know we talk about other things, but the flip side, unfortunately, also is it's also this whole data is the new oil is stifling advancements in medicine, in providing services and other things. Think about it. With AI, we have like systems that can actually look at an X-ray and detect like lung cancer. And people are like, why can't we do more? We don't actually have enough data available for the researchers to actually do that. So there's, on one hand, there's a lot of data being plucked from us we don't realize. On the other hand, we don't sometimes share the data we should be sharing just to advance the human condition.
Right. Thank you. And Jahon, what are your thoughts on the current circumstance? And what have you noticed on social media of late as well?
Well, first of all, thanks very much for having me on the show, Robert. And Neil, I'm going to 100% agree with you. And data is the new oil for all intents and purposes. And I think one of the things that folks need to wrap their head around is that the current structure of governance in our world, not only from a government perspective and international relations, but as it pertains to how we even identify, hasn't really caught up with the advancements in data. I want to give you a quick example. Social media platforms, the internet in general, has allowed us to connect and interact with folks all around the world. And that data, of course, is being collected in a variety of different ways and can be put to a lot of good use. But it's created this concept of transnational identity, right? Where you are starting to look and associate beyond borders. And I don't think that the governance structure we have in the world today is really caught up with that. And what's resulted is we've had this sort of siloed and centralized control of data in these, quasi, government, large social media platform companies, and they're almost starting to merge to a degree as well. So I think that as we start to...
Did you just say government merging with social media companies?
Well, I mean, for all intents and purposes, they are, right, Robert? I mean, look, Lobbyists walk the halls of Congress all day long, and we're in this, we're in this dynamic now in the world where you have a few different groups of power players. You have nation state governments, you have NGOs, you have large multinational corporations, and where they interact is where they overlap in regulation, where they overlap in their goals. And what we're seeing is sort of like this, by default centralization of power and control. So I think that one of the main drivers to be able to help decentralize and liberate access to that data at an individual level is going to be to a degree the separation of state and money, which a lot of cryptocurrency proponents have talked about as a possibility. So we'll see how that plays out. But we're in a very, very interesting time. We're transitioning out of the traditional nation state system, and a lot of people haven't really come to grasp with that yet. So we've got exciting times ahead of us, but we have a lot of work to do.
So, this whole issue of censorship, right? Selective censorship. And I've also recently experienced it myself. In fact, I have 2 Instagram accounts. One of them, I have a large following on, and I was not able to just do a live because I got a picture that I wanted to put out to my community. It was just a hand drawing that basically got deleted and by the AI. And I was told that it was against the community policy, right? And it was, I'm into Egyptology and I follow a lot of Egyptology. And I had mentioned, and I don't know if it's because I mentioned the word Osiris and Isis, which is from Egyptian mythology in this picture I had hand drawn. And that may have been the reason why it got deleted, right? Because it was at a moment where ISIS-K was happening, and this is just a hand drawing, like literally a hand drawing. So here we are, I'm getting censored by the thought police. And because of that, I was not even able to do a live on that Instagram platform. So I had to go to my other Instagram platform that I just set up. Literally, I just set it up last night because I was concerned about stuff like this happening. And sure enough, I was right. Luckily, already, several thousands of my followers have already moved over to this other page in one night, and I still have my other page. But this is becoming very commonplace, and it seems like this is clearly a mistake. But it's like going to the Politburo, trying to ask for wait a minute, this is a mistake. This can't be right, and actually, there's just no response. And I can only think that it's because they've got so many of these, they're inundated with these types of requests right now. And anytime you mention the wrong words, so I just, I believe all censorship is a slippery slope. And so my question is we've got an AI expert here. Why is this happening? So why is it so commonplace? How much of it is just completely by accident? And how much of it is maybe partially intentional? I'll give you one other example. One of my friends, he's from Mexico City. He's a Toltec Indian shaman, right? And I met him in Mexico City. He went on my page and his name is Gorilla. His actual name is Gorilla. And I wrote back, "Hi, Gorilla, how are you?" And that got deleted from the community as well, because Gorilla must be a racist term. So now I'm painted on some list somewhere as like a terrorist for saying ISIS and a racist for saying a guy's name.
I'm not surprised, Robert. That's the big challenge that we have. Think about it. I think what they say, there's 2 trillion tweets a day. There's not enough people to actually sort through the data. And you're right, using all these AI machine learning tools, it really boils down to how we train them. So the data we use, is that data biased? And the human trainers, because we have to give the system rules on how to make decisions. And the more variation, the more we have to teach, the more time we have to invest. And as a result, you see a lot of people working on stuff they don't fully understand, or there's lots of scenarios they don't fully actually ever think of. Gorilla, unfortunately, is a good one. It is a racial epithet for African Americans. Google got in trouble 4 or 5 years ago because their Google Vision, good image recognition stuff, but when it came to people, at least back then, it was great at identifying if you're a white male. not if you're a woman or an ethnic minority. And if you were African American, it actually did think you were a gorilla. Were those guys trying to be racist? I don't think so. But I think you had a lot of people that were probably white men developing the system, training the system, and they never think about the diversity of human people, right? So we talk about like the importance of data. Just think about even the human face alone. It's not just eye color, your nose shape, skin color. It's also, are you wearing glasses or not? Are you wearing a hat or not? What are different kinds of hats? So more variation requires more training.
So, okay, but there's also seemingly kind of a very strong narrative, right? That's happening here, right? There's a lot of censorship that has been happening, not just to me, but to my friends and everything, people that I see. I mean, is any kind of censorship a good idea? I mean, we have a freedom of speech as a First Amendment right. And in this day and age, right, how do you maintain a democratic environment when you don't have freedom of speech? When the norm has become one where everyone has a soapbox, and that today's proverbial soapbox is the sort of the public forum is social media. So yeah, they'll say, well, you can still go to the town square and jump on a soapbox somewhere in reality, but nobody's there, right? That's the problem. There's nobody there. So this has become the new forum for that soapbox. And now all that has to be done is to take away the megaphone. And so then, of course, doesn't that then somehow in a dystopian way connect these corporations with their agenda to getting people elected that they want to get elected? I'm not Democrat and I'm not Republican. I vote both sides of the aisle and always have had. But the question I have is, how can we have a democratic environment when we have this kind of rampant censorship, whether intentional or unintentional, happening?
Yeah, it's certainly fascinating. It's like I think a lot of these social media platforms, I hate to say panic, but I think that the entire industry of online information is in a state of panic. They're chasing a new business model, right? Certain things, certain hyperbole yields more clicks, and clicks yield revenue. And I also think that a lot of these platforms are very protective of their communities and don't want to be seen as losing their potential customer base. So you have a lot of these passive types of controls where it's you have a few people at the top of a company, of a social media platform, that are in effect putting the rules in place for what they perceive to be the value system of that entire of the the aggregate users on there, and that could be that's very troublesome. All right, because it can really walk you down a slippery slope. So I think I think we're in a lot of changing dynamics with regard to how data is monetized, and I think a lot of these platforms are trying to predict what they think the values of their aggregate user bases are going to be, and humans are infinitely fallible, so we'll see we'll see how that goes.
Neil, what are your thoughts on this? 100% in agreement with Jahon, and that's one of the challenges. Is at the end of the day, we're using a service with these social media sites, and so they control and they're designed to influence, and they've gotten really good at subtle influence, right? Even nudging us towards certain products, certain people to follow. That it makes it really tough for us to realize sometimes what's going on. And in your case, Robert, right? It seems obvious, right? This guy's name was Gorilla, and you're saying hello. You had this picture about Egyptian mythology, but the problem is there's nobody actually looking at that at the site. And even if you file something, it could take forever for them to actually get to. So it's not a question of being fair or being right necessarily, right? It's unfortunately, are you kind of towing the line or not? And I think that's the big challenge we have with everything that's floating around in social media and all the deep fakes and the false information or misleading information. I think it's not so much about what we're trying to do, but what generates views, likes, comments, as Jahon was actually talking about, that really drives that model. I mean, I think we've all been a victim of clickbait, right? Or misleading.
Oh, yeah. Well, what about this though? And this specifically for you, Neil. So, my likes and preferences obviously are known. The data that I am producing is getting somehow synthesized and monetized in what I am shown, right? So the types of information that comes to me is going to be the stuff that I'm more likely to like, right? Because then that gets more engagement, that drives better, sort of values and metrics for the AI and everything else, and then that probably translates somehow to more dollars, right? For the companies, whether in engagement related to advertising or in being able to sell that data to somebody else. So does that then mean that I literally am living in an echo chamber of what I've already chosen before?
That's unfortunately exactly what's happening. I actually wrote an article about this, that social media is good as they're learning exactly your interests and your hobbies and what would appeal to you. And then all they do is feed you streams of the same thing. So all it does is reinforce your existing viewpoint without being exposed to other things and the things you like. So it's
easy,
sort of
it's easier
bubble around you.
Right? I mean, it's easier to monetize things you agree with rather than monetize a challenge to you. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, that's kind of mind-blowing. So that means that we're all living in a virtual echo chamber of our own conditioning bias. That means that Republicans become friends on platforms like Facebook with more Republicans, and they're the ones introduced to more Republicans. So they literally believe that everyone in the world that they know thinks the same way they do. So they get a dopamine hit to think, oh, look, I'm right. I'll like that, right? And so what it does is it dramatically polarizes society to the edges, right? Where even someone in the center looks extreme. So this is a problem, isn't it, for democracy? Isn't this a real fundamental issue? Because now we have no ability to even empathize. We've lost our muscle to be able to empathize with other people's perspectives and see their viewpoints, because we don't even ever need to now. And every time we do, it's entirely foreign to us. It's like we're talking to an extraterrestrial.
I absolutely agree, Robert. That's why I think it's ironic that here we are in a time where we're talking about more tolerance and understanding, yet we're totally intolerant of someone with a different viewpoint or attitude or behavior. And that's unfortunately exactly what's going on. We're already a cliquish society, right? Think about even in high school. And now we just be able to create these kind of super cliques that are nation or global. And so if all you ever hear is people that totally agree with you and think like you do, guess what winds up happening?
Jahon?
No, absolutely. And one of the things too that I think we need to talk about is levels of perception and how that's changed as well, right? My old agency, we talked about levels of perception, right? How I perceive you, how I perceive myself, and how I perceive that you perceive me. Take that to social media for a moment. What people start to get into a habit of is projecting what they want the world to see of them. That happy picture with the family, my XX Pro filter on my barbecue, and you start to create by default this sort of like cyclical envy amongst maybe your old friends, amongst coworkers, whoever else might be in your first layer network and your second layer network. And it creates this race internally of like, you need to compete with the image of what you think other associates or other friends or other people in your life are doing, but that doesn't really match the reality always. And that's kind of the sad thing. And for your viewers, ask yourself, I want the viewers to ask themselves like quietly, like, you post something profound, what you think is profound or you think is great. You sit there and you scroll and you refresh and you wait to see who likes. You want to get that validation.
I've never
people
done
need to be, well, I know you did, but I just say, like, people want that validation, right? They do. And I think that it's going to really affect the way we teach our kids. I got three young kids, and some of my friends thought I was nuts. They got a phone as soon as they could walk.
Oh yeah.
And I wanted them to understand, because here's the thing, like, as I can only tell you, the rate at which we are going to interact with machines is only going to increase. So I don't want it to be like keeping a kid away from driving, and as soon as he gets his license, give him a Ferrari, right? I didn't want it to be that. I wanted to have give him a phone early and start to play with it while I still had some influence in their life while they were still young. But I drive that home early, and I encourage other parents to do the same thing too. Of like, understand what you're seeing here is not reality; it is a projection of reality, and don't underestimate your kid's ability to understand that. Kids are smart, right? So I think it's really going to be important how we, communicate about how we want to teach the next generation of folks. I mean, this is new to us, right? When the three of us grew up, when we were young, we didn't have this, right? We're just figuring it out. But I think one of the things we need to consider is that younger generations now, the 4-year-old to like the 10-year-old, they've known this their whole life. They might not be as easily fooled as we think they will be, right? I think we need to give the younger generation a bit more credit. So I think it's going to really come down to like how we parent and how we talk to our kids about this.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So is centralization the issue on social media? I started a social media company a while back, about 9 years ago. It was in a specialty space within healthcare. It took off very fast. The very beginning, I made it very clear I would not tolerate any kind of censorship whatsoever, because I think that kills a community. And I can't remember who it was that said, I may fight with you on what you express as your opinion, but I will fight to the death for you to have the right to express that opinion. And I've always believed that. I think it's just a fundamental tenet of a working democracy, a functional governance system, being able to empathize and learning that you don't have to go to fisticuffs on every topic. It can simply just be, okay, I'm going to listen to you and I hear you. And I've learned so much in my life when I've done that, right? If that gets taken away from people because of an AI algorithm, what happens in this world, right? This goes beyond just democracy. It goes to basic, what it means to be a human being, right? And how to even empathize at all. So is centralization the challenge here, that there is kind of this whole centralized, first of all, if you believe that censorship is okay, because we live in a world today where everyone gets so easily offended, right? I don't remember the last time I was offended. I don't remember the last time I was insulted, because I didn't grow up. I wasn't taught that I should be offended or insulted on everything, right? Or that was not my conditioning bias. But now we live in a world where everyone gets so easily offended that even someone who puts their handle as gorilla, and I just say back gorilla, is something that somewhere along the way, the AI was instructed, erase the word gorilla. Well, what about actual gorillas, right? It's like, so now they can't even be talked about. We can't talk about gorillas because the AI says that word is not allowed. I mean, think about the Handmaid's Tale dystopian environment this could rapidly devolve into, because the number of words that are offensive don't go down and get smaller. They get larger and larger. It's like government. Government never contracts. It only ever expands. So is this a centralization problem? And if so, how can blockchain potentially address this?
I would argue that it's more of a people problem, and blockchain can still help with that, because we always talk about people, process, technology. We know we can do things to improve the process and technology side. The challenge is on the people side. So what should be allowed as censorship? Should anything be allowed as censorship? So we're talking about kind of morals and ethics now. And forget about countries. Each person kind of has their own coda. I will throw myself under the bus here. 2018, I was asked to give a keynote at GSR, it's the big global regulators conference. And in my speech, I said what everyone was thinking but doesn't want to put a voice to, right? In the digital age, there are no boundaries, right? You can port technology, you can access social media in most places, right? There's really nothing to stop that except whatever, guardrails these companies put in place themselves. If you're talking about using this stuff and trying to do what's right or encourage right use, what does right actually mean? Now you're talking about people's morals and ethics, and that's the thing. And I will tell you that when I was done, no one clapped. People were visibly angry. I remember the Deputy General of the UN ran up to me and was like, "Really brave thing you did, Neil. It was the right thing to say." but you made no friend. You should probably get out of here, right? So
Wow.
basically make it, surprisingly, they invited me back the next year. And when I was walking around in the hallways, guess what I was hearing? I was hearing the regulators, little small groups, talking exactly about that. What would this baseline ethical model actually be?
Yeah, I mean that's a big question about what is ethical, because at least it's maybe taken me 52 years to learn that even myself, all the things that I thought were the only ethical choice, by some strange coincidence, always somehow benefited me. Right. And I think I can't be the only person that does that. It's like, I may not be the one who looks to see how many likes you get after you make a post. That's a joke, by the way. But the fact is, right, like it's taken me that long to learn that a lot of the things that I thought were hardcore, black and white issues were actually just the things that were benefiting me. And
well, I think, Robert, a lot of people have a hard time negotiating the fact that every decision is economic that you make, and every decision is selfish, and that's not always a bad thing, right? Selfish has a bad connotation to it for a word. Even if I was going to donate to charity, why am I donating it? Why am I doing it? Not because I'm going to talk about it, and not because maybe I want recognition from my peers, but it fits in with my moral code. It makes me feel like I've accomplished something towards my, building up my morality and my belief system. Or else, why would I do it, right? And Ayn Rand has an entire collection of essays on this, on the virtues of selfishness. And I think it's something that a lot of folks are afraid to talk about because it's so easy to say, like, oh, you can't be selfish, you have to be selfless. But I think we have a misunderstanding of the word, quite frankly. Mm-hmm. And I think if people were a bit more honest with themselves, you're not going to do something because it is going to hurt you. Nobody does. That's ridiculous, right? Even if you're going to go out of your way and sacrifice to help somebody, that again is filling part of your moral code and fulfilling part of what your belief system is, right? So in effect, you're doing it because it benefits you and making you feel good somehow inside, or making you feel like you did the right thing, or else why would you do it? And that's hard to program. That's the challenge, is you can't programmatically write these things. And I think a lot of the folks that are in charge of social media platforms, they develop this godlike complex, right? Like, we control this community. But I think they're getting ahead of themselves. There's a complexity to the human mind that we're not even close to touching yet. Not even close. Right. So it's kind of silly for them to think, and kind of arrogant to think that they can, right? And we're going to have all these changing sentiments and words like you were talking about earlier. Like, I remember in the 80s, something radical was great, but that might not translate these days, right? That's a little passé, a little behind the times, right? Now take those types of subtleties in the English language and bring them all to all the various different languages and all the dialects of the languages and regional, regional sayings across the globe, and think of how quickly they change. We got a lot of work to do before we can program that stuff accurately and accordingly. I just think that the folks that are in charge of a lot of these data platforms and social media communities need to understand where their own limits are and their ability to do this.
So where does blockchain fit into this? Because are the next generation social media platforms, are they now, because we're all being brainwashed through our own conditioning biases in the echo chambers of chat rooms, are they just going to be able to maintain their dominance, or are there going to be new platforms, in your opinion, that will be able to successfully break through? And will those also be centralized platforms, or will it be a move more towards a decentralized, so that it's not controlled by a small group of people that have a God complex?
Well, I'll tell you where, I don't know the exact answer, but I can kind of point you in the right direction on this. Blockchain, to me, has the potential to solve the global trust deficit, because trust is built into the protocol. And I think that that's a great pathway for people to start to realize and have a better understanding of how their data is being monetized. And not just like their personal data, like, my name is so-and-so, I live in this area, I check that I have this job, I went to these schools, but their interactive data. I think once people get an idea of how much their interactive data is being monetized, blockchain serves as a pathway for you to be able to pick and choose and to be able to monetize that based on your own preferences and have you be the recipient of that monetization. And I think once people have a better economic incentive, then you're going to see a lot more trust be built into the community. Because right now, I'm playing on my phone, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, and by default, these types of interactions I'm having, I'm subconsciously giving away my data to experience this. But I think that most people, like the vast majority of users, don't really fully grasp how they could really monetize themselves and their interactive data. And blockchain provides a path. And I think once we're able to do that to a degree, and I know, Robert, you've talked about this a lot, then you'll see an economic model and a business model behind everyone's interaction, rather than having it drilled down from above from the platform. I think that once we decentralize those types of actions and everyone's incentivized on their own accord and on their own preferences, then I think you'll start to see trust matriculate out through that network.
Absolutely. No, I could not agree with you more. I think people don't. Do you think people don't know the value that their data is being monetized for?
I think people, you know what? Most everyday people, like, look, we're in this world all the time, right? Like, we think about this. Everyday people, they know it's monetized, they hear about it, but they're not paying attention. And I think we need to get them to pay attention. I think if we put an economic incentive behind it, people start to pay attention.
Or if you're losing something also, that's another thing people start to pay attention to.
Right.
Go ahead, Neil.
No, they do. But I also think it's too ethereal for the average person, right? Because they don't really know what data they're giving up, right? They know they got my name when I clicked on, but there's all kinds of behavioral, psychographic stuff they don't realize they're actually coughing up. And that's the thing. And, it's like, I don't know if you guys have watched The Social Dilemma.
Yeah.
Right. Most people I know who've seen it, they get appalled. Like, I didn't know they knew this about me and they're doing this with my data. But then I asked the question, like, well, did you delete your social media accounts? Well, no. And so even if you tell them or help them try to understand the value or what data is actually being collected, I think there's this kind of implicit covenant going on saying, like, well, I get connected with my friends and I get this content. I mean, as long as nothing bad happens, I guess I'm okay with that.
Well, there's also not much choice for them either, right? There's not another place where their friends are, where they could go. I mean, I think if that were the choice to be made, where they could go on one platform where their data is not mined in like a data plantation, and the other platform would be decentralized versus a centralized control, and one that doesn't have quite as much or any at all, preferably censorship. If they had that choice, I think they would make that choice. A lot more people would, but we've got monopolies, right? Facebook is a monopoly. Let's call it for what it is.
No, that's exactly right, Robert. And like, that's something that gets glossed over a lot, is people are afraid to call back and rally some of the antitrust laws that we've had on the books for a very long time. Nobody wants to have this discussion seriously in Washington, but that's exactly what it is. It's a monopoly. And we have mechanisms to address that, but we just refuse to use them right now because the lobbyist groups and the special interest groups are too entrenched with the policymakers.
But we're definitely seeing a trend right now where people are leaving Facebook, Instagram, and setting up large Telegram accounts. Right?
It's a good trend. It's a great trend, but that's a lot of catch up to do. It's a significant amount of catch up to do. Facebook has a large, enormous, not first mover advantage. We had MySpace, and that which disappeared. But I struggle with this and wrestle with this of how do we be more transparent with ourselves as to what we feel is right and wrong, and where are the alternatives, right? And it depends too, because across these different platforms you're having different conversations. Facebook, for me, that's where I can post pictures of my kids and people love them.
Right.
Instagram is where I'm taking pictures of the food I cook. LinkedIn is where I'm posting things of my professional development. Twitter is where I'm being being a little bit more edgy, but I think that's pretty consistent across the board. So like, I think we are struggling to discover really like viable alternatives. I'm glad Telegram has seen the success it has, but it does have limitations. So I think once we start to address it societally as the monopoly that it is, perhaps that some of these alternatives will start to emerge.
Okay, well, what about Apple's recent foray attempt, I guess, into getting access to everyone's iPhotos, right?
Oh,
Which
actually,
was a
Robert,
major departure. When I saw that, I was like, wait, what? I mean,
yeah,
Apple
think
has always
different,
been
right?
this paragon of virtue that has always protected privacy. And then all of a sudden they do an about face, and I couldn't figure it out. And I was kind of stunned by the whole thing. But I'd love to hear your viewpoints on this.
You know, it was funny. Yesterday on the radio, I heard a DJ, and I thought about this exact same thing, say, Apple's just come out with a notification that they have discovered a new vulnerability across all their devices and that you need to update immediately so you're not vulnerable. And I'm like, oh my goodness. This is totally, because this is a total like PR mechanism because of this exact issue of being able to access your photos. I mean, who knows where it's going to stop? It's not going to stop at your photos. I can tell you that. But I think that's Apple's way of assigning liability elsewhere, quite frankly. And it's taking us down a slippery slope of making the company a little bit different than we thought it might have been. But that's our own bias. That's our own conditioning bias, Robert. We had this vision of what Apple is, and companies change like people do, and they evolve for better or for worse. And I think that we need to sort of accept that the mantras and the values that were there when the company was founded are not exactly the same as they are now.
And that's another aspect of it. I think that's something that's kind of nice about a blockchain, right? Because blockchain is immutable. So you can't change history. You can't go back and say, no, that's not what I meant. You can't do like Google, where they say, before they had this, whoever would have a mission statement and sort of a credo that would include the words, don't be evil. But they kind of bounced the don't be evil, right? And they really super de-emphasized it, right? In all of their new stuff. So, but if you have don't be evil in your blockchain, it's always there. It's never going away. So there seems to be some solidity in that concept in and of itself. And maybe that provides some degree of promise or hope for the future. But, I think this is becoming the norm rather than the exception, that we tend to use a crowbar like Apple did. The crowbar here was pedophilia, right? So they know that the Democrat side of the ledger is not going to be against them necessarily because they don't seem to care as much about their data. Maybe not. Obviously, that's a blanket statement, and it's not something that would apply to everybody. But that's certainly not been. They seem to be more pro censorship, more pro. Let's make sure the messaging about the science is correct. Related to COVID in particular, and I think that has been the powder keg that's been a catalyst for all of these weirdisms that are now happening. Right. That feels very dystopian and sort of, like I'm reading out of Ayn Rand's, Atlas Shrugged, or out of 1984, or watching the film, V for Vendetta, right? Where everything is done for the public good, right? But that freaks me out because I know enough about history to know that the term, as soon as someone starts saying, we're going to do this for the public good, that's usually the entree to genocide. That's usually the entree to mass racism.
Historically, it hasn't played out very well, has it?
It never has. It literally never has. So that starts to get my alarm bells going, wait, what? What is going on here now? And we need to speak out, because just like my father told me, I said, Dad, is this free? Can we go there for free? And he said, son, nothing in this life worth anything is free, not even freedom. So at some stage, we all have to be willing to speak out and voice our thoughts on this and how we're feeling about it. Because if we don't, believe me, this could be, especially with this brainwashing that we're actually going through, what has been described of echo chambers, that is a form of brainwashing. No doubt about it. We get stuck on our own dopamine hit of what we already believed.
Oh,
So I don't
absolutely.
know
And there's
about
a
you.
business.
I've
It's the
changed my
business
mind a
model.
lot of times in life. I've changed my mind. I've said, hey, I like the right to be able to change how I view something. Something that happened to me that was very bad earlier in my life. Now I look back and say, gee, that was the best thing that ever happened to me. And it took the perspective of time for me to be able to fully appreciate that reality, right? But I don't want that taken away from myself, right? I don't want that ability, to be gone. So it's the same thing. I want to be able to listen to opposing viewpoints. I want to be able to have my mind be open to changing and to adjusting, right? But organizationally, I can see how that becomes kind of problematic because now you've got someone who said, "Oh, I'm all for non-censorship, and we're all about protecting data privacy," and like Tim Cook, and now all of a sudden about face. But then really the reality is this: is it maybe what's impacting his thinking? Possibly that they're facing a huge saturation of iPhone sales.
Oh, absolutely. At the end of the day, it's all economically driven, right? You're in this echo chamber because it's easily monetized. And there's a business model that drives your cyclical ride through those types of echo chambers. Oh, I like fishing. And then all of a sudden you get like all sorts of like Bass Pro Shop ads and like all sorts of new tackles and lures and like boom, 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 you're clicking and you're clicking. Maybe you buy something. And that's the same with ideas too. And that's where I really believe that blockchain is the pathway to this. Once you start to realize that you can monetize these a bit more on your own and get the reward and experience it for yourself, then it really is a game changer. But yeah, right now Apple, like this is like the same thing with like those old school refrigerators that used to have like the curved corners. That company went out of business because they never broke, right? So they had to transition to service as opposed to like product sales. And Mercedes ran into this problem in the 70s. Their cars were so well manufactured, they never broke, and they almost went out of business because they couldn't make new cars. Now, Apple's not going to like dial back the quality of their iPhone, but they realize they've reached this point of saturation and they have to figure out ways of monetizing their user base other than hardware sales, right? So, yeah, at the end of the day, it's all going to be what is driving the business model.
So, Neil, what did you think when you heard about the Apple crowbar?
The same thing. I mean, I get the thing with the spyware and the update, but it's not shocking, right? Was it like 3-4 years ago? All these celebrities with the new photos, and they thought they had deleted them, and Apple had copies of them, and apparently the employees had access to them, and that's how they got back out. I think a lot of people were like, "Whoa, well, that's." I don't think they were surprised, maybe a little disappointed, but they're like, "Oh, well, who knew, right?" We all, I think, subconsciously know this, and that's the problem. We're okay with these things until something goes wrong, and I think to enact the change we're all talking about, we can't be okay until something goes wrong. We have to not be okay with it, and we have to be able to take control of our data. This again, where blockchain can really come in, and it's the same thing. Even they're like, well, we're using these machine learning algorithms and just really managing things. You could use blockchain to at least keep a record of the types of data and the training you gave to it. So if you did encounter a thing like block anything that says gorilla in it, there's that indelible record to show us like, wait a second, maybe you took this too far. So I really think a lot of the things we're talking about, I think most people know it's not quite right. They may not know what to do about it, but we have to make a conscious choice as society to actually tackle and try and address it. Otherwise, it's going to just get worse and worse. I mean, the level of information that these companies know about us now, it's absolutely ridiculous, right? You go to Target in the summertime, you're buying, the large trash bags and 2 gallons of milk a week. They know this guy's got 2 kids at home between the ages of 11 and 17. Right, just from those purchases.
Yeah, you can reverse engineer this in really scary ways.
Yeah,
to get it to get a consumer profile. Absolutely.
So, what's the solution here, guys? What do you think? I mean, and how does blockchain? One of the things that I look at blockchain and say, after I really dove deep into understanding, because I didn't really fully grok it until I grokked it after I learned what the word grok meant. But the truth is, I looked at it finally and said, wow, this is a referendum process. It's a referendum process that requires no representation. So, a lot of people think we live in a democracy. We don't. We live in a republic. this is it's a republic built on democratic principle. We don't vote for issues, we vote for people that we believe are entrusted to represent our perspectives and issues. But the truth is, the lobbies are too powerful. And I've spent a lot of time in Washington. I've spent a lot of time, lobbying congressmen, senators. I've met them many, many times. I think at one point I probably met almost every single senator and every congressman in over a 2-year period. What that does is it shows me exactly how the system really works. And that was pretty shocking, but it is a fact that lobby firms have an inordinate amount of control over the narrative, the dialogue, the everything. We all think that, it's congressmen that write bills. Newsflash. It's not. It's companies that write bills.
It's the 25-year-old staffers.
They get modified by the chiefs of staff or the team that works for the congressman, but the original draft, the flavor, the everything, and they have to be miles wide and a centimeter deep on anything. So they don't really know the details of topics. They decide, okay, this is going to be good for my constituency. So, okay, let's have the lobby firm write this bill with their outside law firm. And that's who writes the bill. And then in the end, it goes to the congressman or senator, and then they introduce the bill. I know because I've introduced bills before. I've done this before. And I was stunned at the whole process. Then what happens is it gets whittled down and chopped, and it's like a complete negotiation, balagan, as they would say in Israel. It's like this total battle over, what special interest is going to get this and who's going to get their back scratched here. And it's a mess. It's a total mess. But blockchain seems to avoid all of that. Go straight to a referendum process, and there's nobody in central control of it.
No, absolutely. And I think it's going to start from the ground up, Robert. At the end of the day, it's going to take strong leadership. And I would love to see a day where we had blockchain voting. Imagine that. Imagine you had an immutable blockchain voting. Now, is that going to happen overnight? Of course not. People are going to freak out. No way. But we start to see this at the grassroots with local officials, with local politicians. I think you'll start to see a groundswell. Things we do well here in the United States is we do things well when we start at the community level and at the state level, and then they filter up. That's where we have our best success, when things grow up rather than be brought down upon us. So I think there's a lot of promise, right? We have a lot of very specific blockchain empowering legislation and laws in states like Wyoming and Texas. You have a very pro-Bitcoin and cryptocurrency mayor in Miami. And I only see those numbers growing. And we're so very early that within the next decade or so, we might have a viable chance of having someone run for president that has a good chance of winning or being a major party nominee who really understands it, right? But it's going to take this continued work at the ground level to make that a reality. Like once we start to see successes with citizenry as a service, to a degree. The way I get my permit to build something on my land, the way I pay my local taxes, right? The way I deal with licensing. Like all of these little things are going to be able to stack up on each other's success level. And I think that's probably a much more attainable methodology of seeing blockchain really integrated in our society rather than a top-down measure. It's not going to start at the federal government. It's going to come up.
So actually, I have a question about that, though. I mean, let's say there were a candidate who ran for president who was, against the current methods, right, for extracting data and monetizing it on the part of companies. Would that president even be able to get elected? Would that president even be able to, potential president, even be able to get on the soapbox? Because could they be blocked
maybe.
from access to
We had a game show host as president not long ago.
Right, exactly. So, but that's because he was able to circumnavigate his own party by having 80 million Twitter followers. If he didn't have those 80 million Twitter followers, the Republican Party would have never let him go that far.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I mean, look, I'm not a huge fan of political parties to begin with. Hopefully, we can get it to a point where we start to divest ourselves out of this bipolarity, right? Because it's really it creates schizophrenia, like societal schizophrenia with this type of like two-party system we have, which is ridiculous. So, like that's another like possible potential benefit of blockchain is we start to break down the barriers of our polarization, and it's either like you're a Democrat or a Republican. That's ridiculous. Totally. Washington warned about this really early, and it's too bad that we haven't heeded those warnings.
But I think this goes to this again. A lot of this is a people problem, right? I totally get with the grassroots, but again, people have to make a conscious, decision in their mind, realize that we have a problem and we need to try and fix it, because the system and the infrastructure as is isn't designed. The government's not designed to be efficient. Right, and they're not going to go look for efficiency. Yeah, they're not going to go look for those efficiencies. And you have people that have been in power for so long; they're not incentivized to bring in changes that might threaten their ability to fundraise, keep their office, get reelected, all these things. And I think that's why it has to start. I'll tell you a real quick story. I taught a law class a couple of years ago, and I won't name names, but the state senator from Orange County worked with one of the groups of my class, and they drafted Senate Bill 444, which essentially said, if you're a California government contractor doing work for the state, if there's an issue and you're using AI or machine learning, you have to disclose some details about the data and the training you used, right? Because it's such a black box. And it was just something happens. There's, as soon as that bill hit the docket, it's like in subcommittee, the lobbyists got word of it and boom, just ran it over, right? Didn't really care what was in the bill or not. We're saying like it's threatening trade secrets. It's going to put companies out of business, and you know how it works. Where the money flows is what's one happening. And so the bill kind of died on the vine. For my students, it was unfortunately a really great learning experience for them, because they thought, hey, this is it'll be a good thing. It'll help people. They didn't realize the politics that would get involved. But that's the challenge we face, right? Is one, do we think this is a problem? And two, do most people know just how the system actually works today to realize what we have to do to overcome those hurdles?
Yeah, no, I could not agree with you more. So going back to blockchain for just a moment. So are you seeing a day then that, this whole NFT craze has gone nuts, right? Everyone's like, I can't believe people are buying, stuff for millions of dollars of copyable artwork, which is kind of mind blowing, but it's the value of the original, right? That this was the original. That kind of it seems to be the attraction here. Maybe you can explain this a little bit, John.
Well, the art world, art is one thing, it's one type of NFT, it's art, but it's bigger than that, right? And the art world's kind of funny anyway. I can take a banana and take some duct tape, stick it on my wall too, but it's not going to sell for a couple $1 million like it did in Miami like a few years ago, right? But what it does, it provides a level of authenticity, NFTs do, and it provides a level of establishing a monetizable community around your product or your brand, right? So like trading cards, that's such a natural fit. Like we understand trading cards, and there was a whole little submarket for these as we grew up with baseball cards, basketball cards. To have those evolve into the NFT space is a natural progression.
Totally.
Same thing with brand quality. Same thing. I always felt that the pathway to large scale consumer adoption of crypto would be through consumer rewards programs. And consumer rewards programs are effectively NFTs, right? Where you have status, you have a level, you have a membership, hierarchy or special privileges based on points you accumulate. So I think that's a natural pathway. So I'm really happy the NFT phenomenon has gone the way it has. And I really do see that as a path to large scale adoption.
So basically you can NFT anything then, right? So then I guess you could NFT patents, you could NFT like copyrights, you could NFT a film you make or whatever.
You got athletes NFTing themselves.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So athletes NFTing themselves, what is that? How do you do that? What does that mean?
That's like their fan club. And like through these tokens, you dictate sort of like your membership levels.
Wow. So basically, do you see a day then that people, at the celebrity level en masse will be NFTing themselves?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They already are.
Yeah, they already are.
Yeah, why wouldn't you? I think it's a natural progression. It's the same thing as saying, like, I have a brand and this is my logo, but now it's represented in a digital certificate. That's all.
Right. So I have believed this as well. So that means that people then, even everyday people, could NFT their own data.
Absolutely.
Yep.
You
And
can package it up, and it could be
do
authenticated.
you know anybody who's built a platform like that?
I heard of a guy, believe it or not. I heard of a guy. Same first name as you, Robert.
Absolutely. No, I do believe. I think it's actually returned to sovereignty for the individual. I believe that government exists to serve at the consent of the governed. So it's we, the people, that give our consent to be governed. And we have a responsibility. We have an absolute obligation to speak out and to do something about it when all of a sudden we see tyranny and we see things that are just absolutely messed up. And we have a responsibility and a right to try to do our best to correct that, whatever we believe that thing is. Again, I don't necessarily agree with everybody. I don't. I can't. But I definitely will fight for their right to say it. And I do believe that people should be able to say it. Right now, it's different. It's like they should be able to say it in public forums. They should be able to say it, but not necessarily come to my house and be screaming at me in my house all day long either. Right? That's a different thing. But I don't think that they should be expunged from society altogether. This just doesn't feel right. And I believe that fundamentally, once people understand that we've all been living and working on a digital data plantation, that we will start to figure out that, gee, maybe we can have our own data sovereignty, and that will actually help us to bring balance back to the concept of democracy. It doesn't mean that it replaces government. It just means that maybe we can start putting it into effective use. I waited yesterday in line for 2 hours to vote in the California recall election. And it was interesting because the people around me were overheard me talking about math on the telephone. I was on the phone while we waited there for 2 hours. And they said, geez, are you into mathematics or cryptography or whatever? And I said, yes. And they said, well, tell us all about this. I was shocked that all the people in the line, it was Newport Beach though, knew everything about blockchain and everything already. I was like totally stunned. So there were some experts in the line. So I was like, wow, that's kind of crazy. But it didn't take very long before people started saying, well, I came to vote here today because I heard rumors also that people have gone to vote in California and they go to the counter and they say, you've already voted. Right. And so that was actually the discussion, that there is that much distrust of our voting system today and its own integrity that people are actually talking about it in the line. And I can tell you, everybody in that line had total antipathy for the government. It was unbelievable. So I cannot see how things can just continue to go the way they are. I just saw a survey that says something like 37% of the United States population would consider, right, a different governance model altogether. That was just like mind-blowing for me. I'm American through and through, but I have never felt the way that I feel right now, which is, geez, maybe I should consider moving to a different country.
We're well overdue for a constitutional convention.
It is there. So definitely what we did at Crown Sterling is we built a platform so that people can create their own NFTs of whatever it is they want to NFT. We never house any data, so we never can go back and check it. And in our first Genesis block, it states right there, your data is your intangible personal property. It is not ours. It's not anybody else's. And therefore, it's protected by the U.S. Constitution, by the Bill of Rights in Articles 4 and 5, as well as the United Nations Charter for Human Rights and the European Unions as well. So I believe that this is a big moment. We stand on a precipice right now where we as citizens must stand up for our rights and freedoms. Government was built, it exists to protect the individual. We don't have a Bill of Rights for the common good. because they realize that the individual Bill of Rights that we have for individuals is the common good. Thank you very much, you guys. It's been a pleasure to have you with me today. I respect both of you immensely, and I know you're both expert in your fields, and thank you for taking your time to spend with us today.
Oh, thank you very much, Robert. Thank you very much, Neil. It's been fantastic.
This was my pleasure. This was a fantastic conversation, guys.
Thanks. Let's keep having it.
Absolutely.
We'll see you soon.
Take care.
All the best.